as leaders, our reputation is more important than anything else. And the way you show up and the way you act and the way you behave will leave a lasting impression on people. All right, welcome back to the Better Human Podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about fight or flight. You know, I've had a few different conversations with clients this week, which has just really reinforced and reminded how difficult it is for us to not operate in that fight or flight. I mean, the big sort of social media thing that we've seen recently is the Coldplay Kiss Cam, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But the first one I want to talk a little bit about is this client who is a leader of the group, and there's been a shift in organizational structure. They've brought in, let's say, a new president or a new managing director, and this individual is moving towards or moving into more of a board of directors role. And it's really interesting, you know, how in the absence of communication, people are left with perceptions, right? And, you know, I sat down and went through a coaching session and helped them sort of organize the communication and how to sort of send it out. And they sent out this broad communication that said, hey, just to give you an update and clarification, this is what's happening. We're switching some of the organizational management roles. They brought in a new managing director. This is who this person is. This is what they're going to be responsible for. And this individual is now moving into more of a board position. And there's not ever been a board in this organization. And a few people freaked out, you know, lots of questions around sort of, you know, how did people get voted on this board? And what is this board responsible for? And, you know, what is the relationship of a board member and the organization? And he came back to me and he said, you know, listen, I've got to respond to some of this stuff. And I said, okay, well, you know, let's create the communications. And it wasn't a lot. It was actually, I think, 3 people that he needed to address. And the recommendation was, look, reply to these individuals or reply to them individually, you know, answer their questions. The more, and I said to him, I said, the more you are communicating, the more you are managing the information. It is in the absence of communication that people are going to be left with perceptions. Anyway, he said to me, he said, look, I'm not going to respond right now. I'm going to wait till the end of the week to see if anyone else communicates. And I'm like, bro, just fucking hit reply. Like, I've basically written the email for you, right? They've come in with a bunch of questions and I've written the email for you. And all you got to do is copy and paste and send it from your email, not the general management email. Anyway, fast forward 2 or 3 days go by and I bumped into him. In fact, we're at an event together and we're having a couple drinks. And I was like, listen, bro, you have to send the email, because I know he hadn't sent it. And he said to me, he said, Greg, I fucking hate dealing with this stuff. I don't want to deal with it. And it hit me, which is, this is by definition the flight response. Now, we all understand that we've got 2 brains. We've got this sort of amygdala and we've got this frontal lobe, or easier language, we've got our sort of intelligent brain and our stupid brain, right? And the stupid brain is really responsible for that fight or flight, that survival, that self-preservation. And what's interesting about that side of our brain, it is so much more powerful than our intelligent brain. Like, it overrides. This is the feeling brain, right? The brain that really impacts the way we think. And I looked at him and I was like, logically, it's such a simple thing, but like, bro, just send the fucking email. Anyway, fast forward this conversation. I get a response from him last night and he forwards me another email from the same person that wrote the first email, basically blasting them, because they did send out this sort of general email, not from him, but it was like a general email to say, hi, thank you. Don't worry about it. There's just a new structure, blah, 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 which again, didn't answer any of the questions. So he's like, can you please help me with this? So I asked him a question. I said, did you reply to his original email? And the answer was no. So I said, okay. And this was actually just this morning. And I was like, you need to take that email and you need to reply. And I just sent him a voice note to say, basically, you're an idiot for not responding. You're creating a bigger problem. The more you avoid this, the more you withdraw from it, the more you flight, the more of the problem is going to be. And again, this is going to show you that as human beings, we are so messed up when it comes down to this survival brain of ours. Like, we'll rationalize why we haven't sent the email, but he'll rationalize or we'll rationalize why it's okay to avoid. So anyway, long story short, the email is going to go out. Ideally, we should get a better response. But this brings us to the point that as human beings, we are not naturally good at thinking and problem solving and sort of operating well within the situation. This is why it is so important for us to rehearse. This is why it's so important for us to prep and practice and plan. And when I teach effective communication, I can't drill this in enough, which is the importance of taking the time to plan through the conversation by using some of the frameworks that we teach, whether it's effective communication or whether it's sort of coaching someone. Because the reality of us being able to operate with this frontal lobe, this intelligent brain in the moment is very, very rare, right? Most of us feel through scenarios. And this is why it is so difficult for us to have, or this is why we have such a hard time having a difficult conversation. Because most of us expect us to be able to walk into the conversation, be effective, have it, get the point across, and voila, something magical is going to happen. It's going to be like waving a magical wand. You know, this is the failure in all the training and development world and coaching world that we live in. Everyone gets caught up in doing the course, in reading the book, in listening to the podcast. Maybe you're even listening to the podcast now. And they go, that's good. I listened to the podcast. I went through the training program. I read the book. But the true art of success is the ability to practice, which brings me to my next coaching client. So this was just an hour ago, got into the coaching session, and her big issue is one of her leaders is getting very negative feedback. And the simple answer to all of this is he's operating as a manager and he needs to be operating as a leader. So she sat down with him the other day and had the conversation of, hi, we've received some feedback and we need you to be a little bit more X, Y, and Z. And this guy turns around basically and says, that feedback isn't true, and that's not what I do. And she literally froze in the moment, right? So it's not her avoiding. This isn't a flight response. This is the freeze response, right? Which is I get in the moment and I'm like, what do I say next? Where do I go? Like, how do I reply? How do I respond? Anyway, I'm going through the coaching session and we're going through the framework. And she said to me, you make it sound so easy. It's like you're so eloquent in how you're articulating the thoughts and the feedback and stuff. And I said to her, listen, for me, it's super easy to be sitting here as a very neutral party and to be able to coach you through the scenario in two aspects. One, I'm not emotionally invested into this scenario. And two, we're not in the moment. We're having a conversation around, okay, if they say this, how do we respond? When they say this next thing, how do we respond? And I reminded her of the whole concept of winging it. Most people think winging it is being spontaneous in the moment. The term winging it actually comes from back in the day in the theater, where there were actors and actresses that would wait in the wings of the theater. And they would be waiting for their time to step onto stage and to act and to present. And in order for them to do that, they had to be incredibly rehearsed and incredibly practiced. So the whole concept of winging it has more to do with being practiced and rehearsed. So in the moment, I don't have to think. This reminds me of Navy SEALs. And some of you have heard, we've had some amazing Rangers and retired SEALs on the show. And one of the common themes in all of them is they say, we have a plan for a plan for a plan for a plan. And we practice and we practice and we practice and we rehearse and we rehearse and we rehearse. Because when we are under fire, when we are on mission, when shit is going sideways, when there's chaos going on, you are not going to think. You are going to simply fall back to what you've been practicing or what you have rehearsed. And this is the same in leadership and coaching people, right? So we went through the conversation and said, okay, well, when this person says this, how do you respond? And one of the arts in this is the ability to ask questions, right? And sometimes the best questions that transfer responsibility and get the other person to think is usually what comes out of the person's mouth. So the person said, that's not true. That's not the feedback. That's not what I do. And I said to her, so how would you respond? And she said, well, maybe what I would do is I'd say, can I give you some examples? And I'm like, you got to stop that, right? That is one of the worst fucking questions in this situation. And this is what corporate does to us, right? Corporate corporate teaches us all this nonsense. And I said, what if you said something like this? If I'm giving you this feedback as your leader, if I'm sitting down with you and sharing this as observation, as feedback, would you consider this to be true? Or maybe something even better, which is, as your leader, if I'm sharing feedback with you, is it your responsibility to take that feedback? Or even better, if I'm coming to you and saying, hey, by the way, there is a problem, right? This is the situation. Would you be willing to think about that and maybe approach it from a different angle? And then the other big thing that the guy said was, who gave you this feedback? And I was like, well, how are you going to respond to that? She's like, well, I'm probably going to say that that's just not important to share. And I'm like, well, that's also pretty bad. And then it kind of hit her. She said, it's even bad. Like when we say, can I give you feedback or can I give you examples? Actually, can I give you examples? We're only setting someone up to defend their actions and what they did. It's kind of like the why question, right? And when I teach communication, I say, stay away from the why question. It's the worst question for you to use as another human being, because all it does is put that other person into a defensive position to justify or validate their actions or their choices. But if we ask the what and the how question, that starts to facilitate a different type of communication. And I said, okay, well, how are we going to respond to that? And I said, why don't you fall on the sword a little bit? I'm a big believer in sort of being authentic and transparent in communication. What if you said this? What if you said, look, the reality is when this first got brought up, I kind of pushed it aside because, sometimes people grumble. And then I heard it again. And then someone else said something. And then someone else said something. And at this point, I've got to say, hey, where there's smoke, there's fire, right? If I'm getting all of these little drops of communication, if there's consistency in some of this feedback, right, I need to say something. So I wanted to bring it up to you because this isn't the first time I've heard it. And this is an important thing to bring up. And we use this line in coaching. It was developed by a psychologist whose just name escaping me, but Adam Grant spoke about this as well, which said, when giving feedback, when you use these 19 words before giving the feedback, it opens people's receptiveness to receiving the feedback. And it says this, it says, I have the highest expectations of you. And I have the belief, or I believe that you have every ability to meet those expectations or that criteria. And that's why I want to give you the feedback. And, you could do variations of that, but we need to be direct in communication, but back to the survival brain that we have, which has been so heightened since the pandemic, right? I mean, I still believe that people haven't fully recovered from this chaotic environment of the pandemic and being thrust into this fight or flight. And when you turn on social media or even just, traditional media, you are just bombarded with chaos and war and economy and situation, is that people are jacked up. They're just in this heightened state of survival all the time. And I think the more you recognize this and the more you start to think, wait a minute, as human beings, we are not going to be successful in our relationships and our leadership and in managing conflict and coaching people unless we take the time to practice and rehearse, because the natural thing for us to do is to survive in the moment, right? Which brings us to the Coldplay Kiss Cam. I know I'm a little late to the game on this conversation, but it's interesting because everyone's like, oh, what they could have done is the CEO could have not ducked and she could have not turned around and they could have just kind of stood there and waved and act normally. The reality is there's like a 0.5% chance that that would have happened because again, the fight or flight response kicks in, right? All of a sudden they're put on camera, which the latest information is this was all of a setup, but they're put on camera and both of them just duck. They just, he ducks side, she turns around. And unless they would have practiced, like, hey, if we ever got caught, this is how we got to act, the chances of them acting normally is very slim, right? And then this comes to the follow-up communication, which was even worse. I mean, it is normal for the world that we live in for people to have these affairs, but none of them have communicated. And their PR team, I would fire them. I mean, I think the advice I would have given them is lean into that and say, look, we get it. It's inappropriate. Both of us were married, but we've fallen in love with each other. We've developed a very intimate relationship, and we spend 10, 12 hours a day together. And we've had late nights where we've been working on things. And all of a sudden we fell in love and didn't know how to handle it and didn't know how to communicate it and all this stuff. But, their reputation is ruined. When you look at a leader, I mean, reputation is everything, right? Like once that reputation is tarnished or disrupted, to gain that back is very difficult because trust is an outcome. I often talk to people about this, which is people think trust is a step. They do this and they get trust. Trust is an outcome. It's an outcome of experience. It's like a perception, right? Like I perceive I can trust this person because of my experience with them, because of the actions and the behaviors I've seen them demonstrate. And unfortunately, financially, these people are completely fucked as well. I mean, they took a really good thing and it's disrupted. And this brand, I mean, more, I think, for her than him, which is, let's say she goes to another organization and she's the head of HR. If you look at a lot of corporate companies, they're specifically large organizations, there's a lot of policies around internal company relationships, right? And whether you're allowed to or not allowed to, or how that needs to be communicated and stuff like that. But from an HR standpoint, what a nightmare for it to be done. But I think it's amazing and how everyone is like, oh, they should have done this, they should have done that, they should have acted normal. But the reality is there is zero chance of them acting normal because the majority of us operate in that fight or flight. And this is where emotional intelligence kicks in, right? This is why we talk about being emotionally intelligent is one of the most important skill sets you can develop or you could learn. I always remind people emotional intelligence, you're not born with. Like this is a skill that you develop. And I always make it easy for people. I say emotional intelligence is made up of 3 areas. Self-awareness, being aware of your personality, and more importantly, being responsible for why you were fucked up as a personality. Number 2, self-management, which clinically is called affect regulate or emotional regulation, which in turn is very difficult, right? Because as we know, we feel before we think, or we're feeling creatures that think. We're not thinking creatures that feel. So being able to regulate and manage that is really important. And that takes practice, right? That's like, we feel the pinch, we feel the buzz, the fight or flight kicks in, the heightened state kicks in, and then we start to manage it. And there's tools around this. This isn't just wishing yourself back to regulation. There's a process that you've got to go through. And then the third aspect is relational management. Like, can I deal with your personality? Can I deal with your situation? Can I manage the conversation? Can I manage the situation? Can I manage the conflict? And it's really important that we develop those areas. And specifically for leaders, right? The spotlight's on us. The spotlight is really on us. And in order for us to be compassionate, authentic, transparent communicators, right? We've got to manage that reflex in the moment. And again, back to the Coldplay. I mean, how simple would it have been for them just to stand still and just wave and just slowly separate? I mean, this all makes logical sense. But I mean, he ducks, she turns, and what a perfect example of how as human beings, we will react in the moment or our unconscious reflex kicks in. So, at the end of the day, this is a little bit of a reminder for us to do a couple things. First, develop our emotional intelligence. It's a skill set that takes time. And specifically if you're a parent or even in a marriage, being able to emotionally manage yourself because we are emotionally intelligent is a skill that we should all develop. In fact, it's what we should be teaching our kids from a very young age. And second, how important it is for us to recognize that as leaders, our reputation is more important than anything else. And the way you show up and the way you act and the way you behave will leave a lasting impression on people. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's little ramble and conversation. Stay tuned for the next show. We're going to be doing this on a weekly basis. And as usual, stay happy, stay healthy, and we'll see you next time.